Hello, Amanda here. So I started this project with a concept. I silhouetted around a skeleton of the iguanodon. I then went on to doing some value contrasts, which is following the workflow shown in the Skillful Huntsman. They do many iterations of the same silhouette with variations in value and colour until they get the desired outcome. So I ended up with this concept. I then moved on to this sculpt, which I based around a muscle diagram for the muscles. I did it with Z-spheres and Z-sketch, which is a method that was shown to me by Levon Archer, who is a 3D artist who works in industry as a freelancer. He did a advanced masterclass in January, which I attended. So I sculpted in the base forms of the muscles based off the muscle diagram. I then looked at some industry work for the detail. In particular, I loved the work by Kevin Bryant, who's an artist for Primal Carnage. He does a lot of cool models with really high detail in. I wanted to try and get that sort of detail into my final sculpt, but I'm not sure I quite managed it though to as high a standard. For my poly paint, I used cavity masking to get colour under the scales, which is easier seen on flat colour. In hindsight, I probably should have put some more detail on the beak area because it's pretty much just a flat colour. Next I looked at retopologizing, so I looked at this example of quadruped topology from 10ravens.com, which is a website a bit like Turbo Squid, and I looked at how the edge loops kind of loop around the limbs. And I also looked at some examples of joint mechanisms and weighting, which are based on Jonathan Rush or Ancient Pigs, low poly joints, and I adapted these for a higher poly model. You can see around the elbows and knees. Some issues I've noticed with this is when animated, the back of the neck doesn't deform correctly. This could be a skinning problem, or it could be because the polygons are too dense for it to crunch properly around that area. Next I went on to my texture maps. My diffuse is a projection of my poly paint. I painted on these lines stripes in Photoshop, as I thought it would be easier to just turn them off when I got to my specular map rather than having to try and paint them out. I also did a gloss map, which is based around this nice description that Mattelli Andy provided on the Eat3D forums, and he's got an example there. It was also pointed out to me by Greg that if I were to use my green channel and overlay it and create a cavity map, I would get a much stronger diffuse map as well. So I had a look at how I would go about making a cavity map from a diffuse map, from a normal map, and I found a nice tutorial explaining how to do it in XNormal, so I might give that a go. In UDK I set up a simple anim tree. It blends between the walk and idle cycle. I also set up a physics asset. To begin with, I had a lot of issues with the physics asset because when I exported it out of 3ds Max, I forgot to scale it to a sensible size. So even when I scaled it up in UDK, the mass was still the size of a teeny weeny dinosaur, and it bounced around everywhere and was crazy. So by setting the mass to a ridiculously high number, I managed to make it stay on the ground when in the editor. So I can now kill it and it stays on the ground more or less. I do have a few collision issues when multiple dinos spawn. If I set this to say 3, they do sometimes walk inside each other and disappear under the ground, and then when they're killed they do crazy things. I'm not entirely sure what's causing that or how to fix that. I've also set up a simple material, very standard, everything plugged into the corresponding slot. To present my piece, I've set up a turntable. I set up some 3-point lighting and a matinee to make it rotate. I've also set up a target camera so that there's no player moving affecting it. The matinee is just a simple thing which makes it rotate 360 degrees. As we can see. In an attempt to get some feedback on my work, I started this thread on polycount back in February because it's an American date. Not got any replies to it, but perhaps I could have updated it a bit more often than I did. I also started this thread on the Epic forums. Not got any replies on that either, but I did only start that yesterday, which would be the 24th. So it's perhaps not surprising that I've not got any replies to that either. To critique my work, I'll compare it to some work by Kevin Bryant. He's got some fantastically detailed scales. A lot of them look like they've been uniquely sculpted rather than just alphaed on like mine were. He's also got a lot more variation in their colour as well. Lots and lots of different tones and hues in the grey. So even though it is just grey, there's lots of different variation in value and hue, which I think is missing from my work because it's all just kind of two-toned. As well as that, all these little bumpy details of the sticky out scales, and a lot of the kind of skin folds, they are kind of missing from my work, and I think my work could be a lot better if it had all of this extra detail in. I'll also compare my work to Sam Denver's Ankylosaurus, which I think looks really awesome, particularly the eye. He set up quite a complex shader and the eye's on a separate map, whereas mine's just a part of the rest of the body's map. So I think my Iguanodon could have benefited from this, and it would have kind of lit up the eye and make it seem more lifelike. As well as that, I think Sam has approached the scales in a very different way to me. Rather than using an alpha, he seems to have sculpted a lot of them on individually, kind of cut into the mesh using the dam standard perhaps, and built each one up with maybe clay build-up or clay tubes. So I think that looks really nice because each scale is unique and they really stand out.